I like the misaligned live.
Hello, hello, hello. And welcome again. As usual, sending live at, let's see, exactly what time is it now? It's around 7 every day. And today, because as you may know, actually, Perspective, Sally has had to take a break for 3 weeks with her Perspective show. So it gives us an opportunity to try out some different ideas. And yes, we're gonna try to do basically a more international show and see how that works out. We already have PTV EU, but there's so many more things to discuss and so many more things to look at. So welcome, Maja.
Hi. Good evening, everyone.
Yes, great to have you here. You have actually been on PTV before, right?
Yeah, a couple of times. Both within the past month, I think.
Yeah, for the PTV EU show.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, maybe you should actually just share a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
Right. So, I'm a somewhat long-time active member of the Finnish Pirate-Party. So that's the main reason I ended up here. But I do some other things as well. I both work on climate and do climate activism. And yeah, that's probably those are probably the main things. And yeah, I do live in Finland, since that's not a given. With
No,
I've
that's
noticed with pirates, like actually living where you're supposed to active. So yeah,
so you could say like a green pirate from Finland, maybe.
kinda, but I don't really feel an affinity with the greens. So maybe an eco pirate or a
Yeah, that's
solar
better.
punk pirate or something.
Oh yeah, solar punk. I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
Solar punk pirates. Nice. Back to
Yeah.
the time before the motorboats and stuff. Anyway, today we're gonna talk about. So I mean, the topic here is Sweden socialist, and I've been thinking about this for a while because specifically the Corona crisis has made has you could say, at least for me, or I think for people who follow this stuff, made it painfully obvious that Sweden is really probably not, right? And quite a lot of the data points that I bring about, and you internationally hear all of the time, it's like, oh, Sweden, that's the dream, and they have such, their welfare is great, and all of those things. But there are so many worrying trends, and I know that this is not only Sweden, but Sweden has actually moved quite fast. And I wanted to look at some of these statistics and, just mention them a bit. And as usual, if you're watching this, you can jump into our discussion as well in Hangout on our Discord if you have some questions or maybe you have some other thoughts on the matter and so on. Just wait a little bit until I guess this is done. You can join anytime. Doesn't really matter. However, the first thing I actually want to, and what you're looking at here, is the general trend, and maybe this was actually really surprising to me. But essentially, when you measure the Gini coefficient, which measures essentially the inequality in a country, and you include wealth, because in Sweden we have a long tradition of looking at income, and actually the income inequality is quite low in Sweden. But it turns out the wealth inequality, meaning, those people who have a lot of capital, is absolutely huge. And it's hard to get data on this in Sweden. I'm not sure. I mean, have you tried to find something in Finland, regarding the wealth and how that has, how that has moved over time?
I haven't actively looked into it myself, but it does hit the headlines in the media like at least once or twice a year. and I think the latest round was just like last week maybe. So it's been there, and it's always it always goes down in pretty much the same way. Like it's always the findings are always that I think the income inequality has increased, and then there's all kinds of counter arguments uh, that vary in like credibility and
But do they ever
yeah,
focus on wealth, or is
I'm
it
not
always
sure.
income?
I haven't paid attention to it, but I think usually it's like the various left-leaning observers, I guess they some try to like bring in wealth into the discussion, but yeah, I can like try to look up the latest
Yeah.
news on it.
Yeah, I mean, we could, yeah, if you have time. One of the things, I was just gonna check with you real quick, and obviously, if anyone in the chat has this experience, but I've been trying to find statistics, and it's really, really, really hard. And I want to actually say that from the get-go, because Sweden is supposed to be very transparent. But whenever we look at these numbers, and you're gonna see quite a few from Sweden, they're all about income, right? And they're always we'll probably talk a bit about the inflation as well. However, I have been able to find, and if you're interested in all of the sources, I will share them on our Discord so you can read for yourself. But it's a Gini coefficient that has been calculated and published, and essentially what it shows here, and I hope that you can see this, but the right one here is the Nordic inequality of wealth and income, where you can see the blue bar here is actually the wealth. And essentially the Gini coefficients is measuring an equal distribution to an unequal distribution, where 0 is completely equal and 100 or 100%, in this case represented as top 100, is maximum disparity, right, in the distribution. So what you can see is that the blue bar here is at 83%, which 83.4%, which is almost, it's hard to get closer to complete inequality. You really have to try. Where our income is only at 25.7, which is a huge disparity, right, between these two. However, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and also Finland, at least according to this study, kind of has the same issues, right? If you look at the G7 averages, you'll see that the wealth disparity is a little bit less, but the income disparity is a little bit higher, right? And in the global, you'll kind of see the same trend. But what's interesting is that it actually puts Sweden on a top 10 in the world unequal countries. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're exactly there at the 10. Indonesia, Philippines, Laos, Kazakhstan, Egypt, Ukraine, South Africa, United States, and Thailand. Those are the countries that we are kind of, competing with in being the most unequal. And I think just that, if we're talking about, a social democrat country, there should be bells to start ringing in your head. And you should go like, wait. How can this be? Aren't we redistributing? What's going wrong here? But this is obviously something that we don't talk about. We don't talk about it in Sweden, and we don't, everyone's like, oh, Sweden is such an equal country, and yada, yada. We are not. The wealth inequality in Sweden is rampant, huge. It's top 10 in the world. We kind of, both Swedish and I think other people needs to get that into their heads, So please don't keep on carrying those kind of notions with you, because they're false, essentially. And it's been increasing extremely fast. Now, I wanted to look a little bit in particular at the corona crisis, because I think for no matter where you're from, you will probably have noticed that during this crisis, it's become pretty obvious certain flaws within wherever you are, and depending on how your country has dealt with this crisis, you could actually tell quite a lot about the, your disposition and perhaps the true definition of, how your parties, where their politics lie, essentially, right? And what happened in Sweden, and this is taken from the Central Bank of Sweden, right? We are not a euro country, so we have our own currency. But what happened immediately? All right, this happened immediately. This is like the 13th of March, 2020. I think it's like, this is the 2 weeks after the even people, it's about the same time that people started reacting here in Sweden. Let's say that. Okay, there was media stuff, but no one really knew. Basically, the first thing that the government did, or rather that the central bank did, was that they were handing out essentially 500 billion SEK, which is something in the size of $50 billion. That's a lot for Sweden. Let's remember our total expense for the state is around 1,000 billion, right? So 1 trillion. So it's a lot. And immediately they had that prepared, and they were basically handing it out to larger companies. The idea was obviously that it should go, as they marketed it, was for small and medium-sized companies. But obviously the banks were not interested in loaning to them in the first place. And as you can see now, a couple of months into this, 165 billion SEK has been used of these, okay? At the same time, they bought different sort of value papers from companies, and we've been talking about this before, and I will make sure. Actually, I'm gonna make sure I edit that out, and we make a video out of that too. But essentially, that's how it works. So this is basically newly printed money. Right, all of this, and kind of goes into a circle, and we're gonna perhaps we will get to that as well. But what was immediately clear here is that who got the money was not, like a basic income for people who lost their jobs, or it didn't go to some infrastructure projects. It didn't go to anywhere where it could be, spent or used for something that would, benefit a greater good. It went out into companies, and it became really controversial when it turned out that a lot of these companies were all, obviously kept paying dividends to their stock owners. And the Social Democrats in Sweden, who are, the governing party at the moment, together with, you can say it's a Social Democrat Center Alliance, their response to this is quite shocking. Okay, I want you to officially in the newspaper they said obviously this is horrible, but the laws that they made was that the larger companies that received it basically made it classified. They classified the larger companies that received this type of support, so no one can find out where at least 95 billion Swedish crowns went. And then when they got picked up, that they, because it became a media story in the fall, what are they doing? And some of them, they said, okay, we're going to move our board, we're going to move the decision to around summertime, late summertime. In the meantime, the government introduced this law, which made it impossible to track. And then a lot of these companies obviously, paid the dividend, and it became a story again, but obviously the facts are hard to come by, and the government was surprised. They're like, oh my God, this law, wow, we can't have a law like that. How are we going to find out where the money goes to? You're like, wait, you made this law. You're the ones that put this in place. So, when you look at this, I think most people, just from this alone, you can start to feel, okay, this is a little bit shady. Now, I'd be pretty pissed if this was a liberal party, because free market and everything, how come these big corporations have this type of, advantage, as to the small ones who are dying, right? And why would they get to have their, parts of this? So it's shady on very many levels, but it's really just kind of the beginning of what's happening in Sweden right now. And by the way, I mean, before I move on, I mean, do you feel like is something here like similar to what you've had in Finland during this time? All right, I can't hear you for some reason. Try to reconnect if it's. Oh,
Better?
yeah, there you. Oh, no, okay, that's working.
Yeah, sorry. So I can't say exactly again since I haven't done a too deep a dive into the corona subsidies we had here, but at least for the for there was several different kinds of forms of subsidies and different institutions and entities that sort of dealt out all of them, and at least for some of them there are like complete lists, so our media actually put together or managed to acquire like complete lists. And there were some minor scandals about it, about some, for instance, some lifestyle blogger, I think, somehow getting a fairly sizable subsidy, and the same person happened to be, I think, the wife of an MEP or something. So there's definitely been some questionable stuff in there, but I haven't heard of, I can't remember hearing, at least hearing of anything similar, like the information actually getting, becoming classified, or like completely, like attempts to completely hide where the money is going.
And I want to be clear. It's actually, at least according to this, it's actually a governmental agency that has classified this information. But I mean, it doesn't matter because the politicians can't act surprised. I mean, they're ultimately in charge, and it kind of goes to this whole the Swedish corona handling of this pandemic has been like, oh well, okay, government agency, you take care of this, and they just dodge everything, right? So to a certain extent, you have, I mean, just this starts to paint a picture of corruption, and at least some grave errors in judgment, to say the least. Because I mean, you're a social democrat, governing party. You're supposed to at least care about the normal people, and I know the general, kind of, let's say, neoliberal argument point for this. It's like, well, if the company goes down, then the workers doesn't get anywhere. Well, basic income, give them money. If the companies are not prepared to handle this, and if they cannot go, go idle for a while, then that's actually honestly their problem. All right. And it may sound kind of harsh, but I think that whenever you get the government involvement in the market in that sort of way, nothing good is going to come out of that. And that's really what we can see here, partly that, and like some form of extreme corporatism. And I mean, to be honest, this is just, one part. Hello, Nino. This is still just one part of it. I want to, like, during the corona pandemic, a lot of information have been classified. And like I said before, it's actually hard to find statistics that I used to be able to find before. One of the things that are being classified, which doesn't really have to do with this, but that's happening right now, is that the public school or the private schools of Sweden no longer have to report number of students. They don't have to report they don't have to report the composition of students. They don't have to report the students' grades. They don't have. There's like a lot of these information where data is now kind of is being removed in different ways. And the reasons for both of these ones is that And that's probably the worst part, because you could, I mean, you could argue that certain data is problematic, or is, this may, this is problematic for this private individual. Obviously, this is not such data, but I mean, I think it's a more fair argument. But what they're arguing is essentially that this data is that's business, that's trade secrets. So what they're doing is essentially telling, well, we got to protect these big businesses from the dangers of anyone finding out how they're doing their business. And these are businesses that are, a part of new public management. And actually in Sweden, in most cases, when you buy a service such as a school, it means that the responsibilities for the public government to be open with their information applies to the person they're buying it from. But these are the laws that they're trying to get away from. And they are getting away from, because this is being introduced now in Sweden from the 1st of September. So, I mean, this is really bad, and it's happening on a lot of different... It's happening very fast in Sweden right now. And, I mean, let's just be honest. If this is neoliberal corporatism, it's very, very, very far. This is about protecting companies from the scrutiny of the individual. I'm, I have a hard time finding anything more opposite to any form of socialist idea, at least, or from what the Social Democrats of Sweden at least used to stand for. And they still have the identity of standing for this in Sweden. They will go out in the newspaper and say, oh, this is horrible. We got to look into this. We got to put someone in charge of this. And then nothing happens. And then the next time it's being brought up, they act all surprised and they're like, "Oh my God, how could that happen?" Well, we gotta have that's the worst. We gotta look at that again, And they get away with it because the fact is, everyone in Sweden, when you talk to a government agency, you talk to the private entities that are that are essentially delivering that sort of service to the people, they're all saying the same thing. I mean, I think most Swedish have been at some point been stuck in that situation. You're pushing a government agency or a private company acting as the government agency to do anything, and they will just push you around. If you're complaining, it's like fucking 5 years, and the government is acting the same thing, is doing the same thing in these matters, which is, which should really start to kind of make more, I would say, I believe more Swedish people really wonder, what the fuck is going on here? Because it's pretty bad. And many cases, they are breaking fundamental, laws, constitutional laws in Sweden, when they aren't showing data, when they are delaying these things, when they are trying to charge you loads and loads and loads of money for money that is supposed to be in the public register. And I mean, their solution to this seems to be to start to classify the data, which is completely opposite to the idea of being able to being able to investigate the power. You want to have transparency upwards, and you want to have privacy downwards, but that's the exact opposite of what's happening in Sweden right now. I'm jumping on. If you have something that related, you can just cut me off.
Yeah.
There's another thing, and we actually talked about this yesterday, because now this, when this type of corruption, because it's pretty clear a form of corruption, right? It obviously makes people pissed. Okay, these big companies got so much money, which were printed, or they came directly from our tax money. And it turns out that, Chinese companies got them because they paid profit to their owners, And now the private industry will say, oh, well, you can't say that. I mean, that was profit for last year, yada, yada, yada. That's not how it works. Do not fall for that sort of shitty lies. That's money that they could have kept in the company's account to be prepared for the crisis, to pay and hire people to do things. When you are paying profit, you're taking it out of the company. And, there are a lot of reporting, on rich business owners, buying new cars and doing all of that stuff. And obviously that upsets people, but it's really not. Again, it's really not what people should be upset about. That's not the big issue that has happened over the last, if you are not one of the people, few, if you are not top of the, the 1% of the 1%, you are most likely getting screwed. And you're getting screwed pretty bad because, and this again is data that's hard to find in Sweden. And it's the actual size, it's the actual, you could say, inflation of Sweden. All right. It's how much new money is entered into our system. How many new Swedish crowns are made each year. And this is the official numbers, right? Since 2002. And I can tell you, I'm pretty sure they're most likely higher than this, and they're hidden in a jargon that is actually quite hard to understand. But the M1 and the M3 seems to be the general, something in between here seems to be roughly what the Swedish people would have available, which to a certain extent would measure the totality of the money within the society. And if you draw like some form of average here, you'll see that the Swedish, roughly the amount of Swedish crowns that are created, a new amount of them that are created each year is around 8%, right? So you have a real inflation of around 8%, and that means essentially that if you are working and you don't have wealth, let's start with that example. So say that you make 20,000 a month. Now, let me make something simple so I don't have to think too much. But essentially, if you make 10,000 a month, the next year you should make sure that you get 10,800 a month. Essentially, every year your salary should increase by 8%. If you want to keep up with the people that are getting really rich in our society. And they're obviously way above that, right? But 8% is the minimum that you should try to increase your wealth and try to increase your income with each year, or you will fall behind, right? So this is a part of the system. So let's say that your salary hasn't had it, and I would say most people haven't had 8% increase. In fact, we can jump to that already. The bottom 5 percentile of Swedish households, they haven't gone. You can see it's pretty stagnant, right? This is really kind of stagnant. And what they're counting this against is the inflation. We may talk a little bit about the inflation, but the inflation is mostly pointless today. But as you can see, it hasn't really, actually it went down in 95, but we can take that as a starting point. But even taking that as a starting point, we're not talking about some 8% increases each year here, right? We are, however, kind of for the top percent. We're probably talking maybe even more than that over this span.
Just a
Yeah.
second. The one of the axes wasn't labeled.
Oh.
The
Oh yeah. So
one you
yeah,
just
this is
had.
1,000 SEK.
Okay. Right. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. Actually, I tried to find this data point again. This is another thing, but it was really hard to find. So the ones they have now aren't really what I'm looking for. I just want the dispensable income for households, and this is obviously it's the different percentages. So if you are, the blue one here is the bottom 10% of the Swedish people, and obviously if you go back to 91, it's nothing, right? It hasn't increased at all, essentially. It's and that's obviously. If you take this into account, basically, if you don't live up to this, you are essentially getting taxed, right? And that's what happens when Sweden is now printing money and they're handing it out in the corona crisis to these big businesses. It's a tax on the poor. You don't see it, but that's exactly what it is, because they're making new money that only gets to be used by rich people, essentially, or only used by these companies. That's why if you're going to print new money, if you're going to do it at all, I'm not for it. But every time the government does that today, and they're going to say, oh, our national debt increases. That's not how it works. Every time they say that, they're actually printing new money. And we've been talking about that before. So you got to be very, very careful with terms like that and language like that. But it's a reverse tax on the poor. because those are the ones that don't get part of this income increase. So if there's more money in the system, your salary should increase by the same amount. And this is a huge problem, and this is one of the reasons why in Sweden we see this grotesque wealth disparity. Top 10 in the world, right?
Yeah, there's another maybe more popular chart that or more commonly known or seen chart that sort of relates to this. It's the one with development of actual productivity and real wages.
Yeah, can you try to find that one, and maybe we can look at it after?
Yeah, I already posted it in the Discord. It's on PTV Live.
Let me see, what was the next thing? Yeah, well, next thing is kind of a case study. That also is one of these that has pissed people off. But let's talk about this particular one a little bit more. So I'm gonna bring that up. Right. Yeah. Right. So
the inflation. This is what we're seeing when it comes to the relationship between productivity and real wages.
Do you know what they're counting on the what's this? Index.
Yeah, sorry, I can. There was a really quick Google for that.
And I want to say, I mean, it's a much huger problem than you just, than poor people getting screwed. And I'm gonna say, whoever is watching this, you're getting fucked. Because we're not talking about, this is kind of the big problem. A lot of people who earn, X amount of money and live in a suburb, they think they're fine, but you're not. It's the middle class, the upper middle class, that are actually globally getting screwed the most. And we're talking about the wealth disparity here that we're looking at. This is the top 1%, and even the top 1% of the 1% specifically. We're talking about not a whole bunch of people that really is profiting from this. And even if you feel, well, I'm fine, if you want to, the big issue when you're starting to have a huge working class and even, workless, jobless class, right? Because of whatever reason, automation, etc., etc. If they don't spend money into the economy, a lot of the things that are mass produced, a lot of the companies that are actually producing kind of dies, and that's a little bit what you've been seeing in U.S. for quite a long time. You have the Targets, you have the Walmarts, you have the cheap stuff, shit, essentially, right? That normal people can afford and then you don't really have that mid-range section anymore. There is nothing, the middle class is weak, and instead you have that, hyper expensive stuff. The luxury goods market is increasing, and super consolidation for the mass produced stuff that the low income earners can get, or the no income earners can get, right? So seeing this is super problematic, right? And it's very, very important to know that, in many times, even in Sweden today, obviously, a lot of people just choose not to see it, but there's a lot of people who just barely have enough food to eat. And the corona crisis is laying a lot of these problems bare. I mean, in Sweden, people are generally forced into a welfare system that in many ways is corrupt, and many ways extremely problematic on its own. And people who haven't, I think if you have ever been in that situation, you know what I'm talking about. And if you have not, I'm telling you that if this continues, you will, this is something that affects the whole economy of a country, and it's really dangerous to allow that to go on. And to get back to what we're talking about, is absolutely at least not social democratic. Let's be clear on that one. Whatever it is, I mean, the term for this tends to be corporatism or neoliberal corporatism, and we can talk a little bit about the implications of that and how that normally kind of unfolds and its relationship to fascism, for instance, because it's important. But yeah, did you find some?
Yeah, I linked it there. There's an article. It's not maybe not the exact same graph, but like at least it shows the same development, and it has a clearer
Yeah,
label for the y-axis. So just like figure A
yeah,
in the link I posted.
yeah. But I mean, this
Can you
one.
find it
Yeah,
on
yeah. I
Discord?
see. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm in another. I'm in another browser. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'm seeing it. Cumulative percent change since 1948. Productivity and hourly compensation. I really wonder how they measure productivity here. But it's kind of beyond the point a little bit, isn't it? I guess it's the value of
Said
each
here
work.
actually in the note right below the chart.
Okay.
Net productivity is the growth of output of goods and services minus depreciation per hour worked. So
Okay. Yeah.
that's yeah.
So yeah. But I mean, essentially, this it's just a really worrying graph to see. And I mean, we're talking here just about, we aren't including the lie about the inflation, which is much huger. We aren't talking about quantitative easing. We aren't adding, the all of this stuff. And maybe I should mention the inflation, because a lot of people say, it's fine. We got a low inflation. Inflation, if you are having the total mass of money growing, it means that your money is getting worth less. And if someone says, well, it doesn't really matter because, in our country, the defense against this is one of the craziest things. And this is so dangerous. They'll say, well, this new money, it's going out to the stock market and it's going to the rich people and they're investing in gold. So it doesn't matter because it won't affect the inflation because they obviously, and also they won't obviously buy more basic stuff anyway. But I mean, essentially what you're saying is that we have two economies. We have one economy for the ultra rich and then one economy for the rest of us.
Yeah, and obviously the chart I brought up, it's based on US statistics.
Yeah.
And it's usually, especially since this is about income, it's probably somewhat less obvious or somewhat less drastic in the Nordics. But still, we've been following the same kinds of, developments here as well. They just tend to come a bit later or be a bit less, dramatic, but the same shit is happening here.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, the crazy thing is that, I feel that, I mean, the same thing is happening everywhere. Everyone followed Reagan's and Thatcher's political, I would say, beliefs, right? And, a kind of unfretted fate in that the market would, kind of work itself out. And to a certain extent, it has, because it's been maximizing profit for the rich. I mean, we're living in a system that is absolutely 100% skewed to making the rich richer. And a lot of people are getting screwed, and this is a great way of hiding it. By making sure that so I think that's one of the things to be super sensitive about, at least because as we move into, I mean, we're going to have huge challenges in the future. And entering those challenges with a lot of people, thanks to Corona, whatever, but, this sort of wealth in disparity, and also the fact that a lot of these people, they can't get a house because of this. They can't get a car. They can't start a family. They can't live. This is real, right? It's not like, this is just, people, they are having an okay life and they're complaining. No, this is real for a lot of people. And a lot of people are getting left behind in a gigantic way. And, at the same time as those kind of rich parts are going to get more and more, more police. We need to protect ourselves from the poor, that kind of attitudes, right? And that's kind of a little bit in a way why this kind of relates to fascism, and why it always has these huge income disparities. If you're gonna keep having them and you're not gonna change them, you're gonna need protection. You're gonna need strong laws and all of that. Yeah, sorry.
Basically, the kind of thing we're seeing, maybe the US as the most obvious example, since most of what we hear, at least here in Finland, in addition to domestic issues, is U.S. politics, U.S. domestic politics. It's sad, but that's how it is. So it's maybe the most obvious example, but it's going on everywhere in the world. Like the levels of unemployment and like even homelessness we're seeing, and like the trend with those. Historically, these kinds of like trends haven't led, like there is no historical example of where these kinds of things have just fixed themselves.
No.
There's no historical example where it has ended well for anyone. So
No, I mean we've seen what happened, like so many times. I mean,
exactly.
Last time in our history, it led to pretty much 2 big wars.
Yeah.
For different reasons,
Back to back.
But yeah, and at least at that point, fascism was kind of part of the second one. That's like kind of people were like, "Oh fuck this, we can't change it politically," in a way. So, but capitalizing on this is pretty typical. I want to take an example, a more practical example of corruption in Sweden. And this is corruption on a very, very high level, and it's pretty indicative of, let's say a failed corporatist state, or a corporatist neoliberal type of state. And the funny thing is here, now, is that the politicians, they don't understand that what they're doing is wrong, right? Because it's so ingrained in our mentality and in our way of thinking that as long as I'm maximizing my profit, that's gonna benefit everyone, So basically, and I couldn't find it, and that's typical right now. I can't find the original letter that was published, but it kind of, this whole story started with the previous government, who for a long time they've been courting Facebook, Amazon, and Google, etc., to open server, how do you say it? Server halls here. What the hell is the name for it? I don't even know. But you know what I mean. Essentially, big places where they'll keep their data and their servers.
Say server farms even.
Server farms. Yeah, that's correct. And I'll get into that. I must say first that I think what further blurs the ability to see the inequalities that while millennials and later can't afford houses, they can afford other consumer goods which their parents didn't have access to. Yes, exactly. They'll be like, oh, you get your latte and you're living such, while most people don't have a house. They can't dream of starting a family. They don't have any real savings. They can't save. They can't really enter, the stock market, They don't have all of those things which upon you can build a life. And the reality is, in the current system, they will never get it. I mean, because you're gonna increase so much, which what happened during Corona is just accelerating this wealth disparity. But I mean, even without it, you gotta calculate that. Okay, I need to make on the money that I have. I need to make sure that I increase my salary and my wealth by 8% just to keep up with the house prices, because that's obviously where a lot is going to be invested. And so I mean, it's really, really nasty. And just because you can get an iPhone that obviously is cheap because they harvest your data, doesn't mean you're rich. In fact, it's the opposite. It means you are fucked. That's the reality. But I want to talk about this because it's a pretty weird situation. So this started in 2000. It's been along for around time. The previous liberal right government, they worked for this pretty much to get all of these big companies here. And Facebook actually started. They started. I think they have 2 server farms in Sweden. They have more locations now. They're starting, and Amazon is also about just to enter the Sweden. And what's interesting here is that the Swedish government, in order to get them here, the new government actually wrote them a letter, and it's they addressed Mark Zuckerberg directly. The whole letter is gone now. I can't find it. I think I'm gonna have to. It's behind paywalls and shit. And I can't find it publicly, but it's very embarrassing. And they basically say Sweden is open for business. Come here, please, Mr. Zuckerberg. We'll do anything for you. We'll show you that. And they even take up token things that they obviously don't care about, which is the climate. They'll be like, well, Trump has left the climate. Blah 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 in Paris, and you. And you'll realize why they don't really care about the climate, because what they essentially gave Facebook to come here is 140 million SEK, Swedish crowns, from the Swedish, directly from the taxpayers, essentially. And then they gave them, they only have to pay 3% of the power tax, the electricity tax. Essentially, a normal Swedish citizen is paying 90 times as much as them. At least that's what they say here. Not sure about that math, to be honest. But whatever, that's what they write here in the article. Amazon, Google, and Facebook, in many cases in Sweden, have been proven to move their profit to tax havens, obviously. So Google, for instance, is paying extremely low tax in Sweden because obviously they can just shift it out. And the same thing, in Sweden. But every time with other companies, but every time, so it's essentially this was sold by consultants, and it was hailed by the previous government, this government, and this is kind of what I want to say. This is no different. There is no difference between the government here. There's no difference between the parties. They're all in on this, right? This was something that they could have stopped. If you're a social democrat, maybe you shouldn't, give huge corporations some incredible market advantages and suck up to them and ask them to come here. Why? And even if you're liberal, how can you disrespect the free and open market to that extent? It's crazy. Now, we can get back.
Basically,
yeah.
Why would you want to why would you pay them for them to colonize you? What? This.
Yeah, and
there's no world, and there's no political ideology or whatever where that actually makes sense.
No, and I think that's really the key take here. There is no political ideology where this makes sense. It doesn't matter where you come from. The only reason this makes sense is different forms of corruption.
At least no political ideology that any of the parties admit to adhering to.
Yeah, you can say you're a corporatist, and you want these huge multinational corporations to take over the world. That's fine, if you want to, at least that's honest. But, pretending, normally they will defend this by saying, and the Swedish Minister of Growth or whatever, he says here, I have personally called many of the international companies and told them about the Swedish interest for more server farms, but also about the changes in the taxes that we are now given to these big actors. That's what he said. And it turns out, the normal argument for this, right, is that they say it's going to be a lot of new jobs. That tends to be the arguments. And this is why a lot of liberals, they fail to see that, this is a lie. And I hope it starts to become clear. What they were promising, Business Sweden and also the consultants who sold this, and there's a lot of people here in between to kind of deal and wheel, and we're going to come to that, how money flows between these people. But they said it would be 30,000 new jobs. In Facebook's server farm so far, they have 56 employees. All right? There's a bit of a fucking difference, right? The idea that these server farms are going to create a lot of jobs is a fucking lie, you know? And everyone gets that. I refuse. I will accept that some, you know, local politicians can get carried away thinking that this actually matters, you know, and they're like, oh my God, Facebook. But, you know, these at least politicians have been working with this for so long, they gotta understand this. I do not accept this is stupidity, you know. This is corruption. I mean, it's the only reason why we want to do this. And we'll move on because there are so many things with this. One of the things is also that Facebook, they can just decide that they don't want to have, they're not allowing any unions. And apparently that's something they can say no to. And I mean, let's just say that that's not really how it works in Sweden, but apparently they don't really dig into this. Apparently this big union, they just said, they're commenting it. Well, Facebook didn't want to. We visited them and we talked to them, but they said no and tells us it's not anything for them. Which really makes you wonder what the fuck the union is doing. You know, that's not really how it's supposed to work in Sweden. I mean, to be honest. Whatever. And this is kind of an example here, you know, in Västerås, where Amazon is entering the market now. And just to note here, Amazon's profit last year was $327 billion or something like that, which is 3 times the Swedish government's expenses, right? So to a certain extent, you can say they are 3 times bigger than the country's government's expenses, right? Which is pretty fucking insane, right? I mean, you gotta understand the size difference here. You gotta understand the amount of money that is involved, and this is kind of what I want to get across here. When we're talking about rich, I mean, just to a comparison, okay? And I because I saw this yesterday, because I'm interested, obviously, in other things occasionally, but it was estimated that the largest they were planning in US another particle collider, you know, that was supposed to be built in the 90s somewhere. It would be about bigger than the CERN one, and it landed on that it would probably cost around $12 billion to build. Right? So they could build, let's say, well, 30 of them, you know, with that sort of money. I mean, I get a lot of people want to, you know, get rich and live a nice life. But, you know, if you get a good deal with these people, you can, you know, just understand the amount of money. But here is from Västerås, where also, you know, they're building these server halls in Västerås, where Amazon is building server halls. The local municipality is expecting to build 5,000 new homes in a few years. Eskilstuna has made the local municipality queue for a house. So essentially, in Sweden, we still have, not a lot, but we still have, you can rent a house. And what happens is you have to go up in a queue and you have to wait for your turn, essentially. But for people that work here, and particularly people who are flown in, because you'll find out that that's what most of, you know, these are they're specialists. It's not like a server hall, you know, a server farm is going to employ a lot of uneducated people, you know, which is somehow what these people think, which is completely, you know, it just hurts my head to even talk about this. But
Yeah,
what they've done
it's
for the
not
people,
like
yeah,
it's not like jobs are just jobs, like interchangeable with anything. But that's what a lot a frightening amount of the discussion, I guess, centers around nowadays just talking about jobs as this
And I want to say, because that's what the government
goal in
say.
and of itself, without really examining
Yeah.
the details that actually matter.
I mean, it's ridiculous because on one hand they say, oh, it's going to be 30,000 new jobs, and a lot of people who don't have a job today, they're going to be able to get a job. That's bullshit. If you don't have the right education for this sort of job, you're not going to get a fucking job there, and they know that because, you know, if what they're saying here, the municipal government have decided to give to let all of the people pass all forms of queues and regulations. All normal people have to wait. Well, if you are going to work with this, what they call the hyperscale network. I mean, listen to how the fucking consultants have fucking fooled these people. But clearly, and they're talking about talent people, so that talent people easier can get a place to live. I mean, they are very well aware to some extent that this isn't the normal people. This is talent people. You know? So when you read this and you just by reading what these people say, these different politicians, you got to understand that, I mean, I take it some of them are stupid, but they're fooling you, right? They're fucking you in the ass, right? I mean, and it's pretty goddamn clear. You can just listen to what they say. You just got to be a little bit critical, you know? And obviously a lot of professors, a lot of independent people are criticizing this, but for whatever reason, this was the first big article that published about this, and normally it's kind of hard. I gotta give, you know, one of our big media, Aftonbladet, some credit for this. They've made a lot of good articles on this case, but still, they are not as critical. I mean, how can you say that it's going to be talent people and then say that 30,000 people and this is going to, you know, be beneficial for people who don't have a job? If you don't have a job, you're not going to get a fucking job here. You know, like, forget about it. Period. You're not going to get one of the 56 jobs. And I mean, here it becomes pretty. Yeah, go ahead.
That's not going into the, like, if you start calculating the kinds of, you know, tax benefits and other forms of subsidies they are paying out to these companies, like 56 jobs, that's fuck all. Like,
I mean, it's beyond that. I mean, it's like 2.5 million for every employee that you have given them with your tax money. It's insane. You know, like on so many different levels. Like, it's just, and the thing is, so they're, and it says here, so Google, Amazon, and Facebook has gotten 228 work permits for people without EU that will work in Sweden. So quite clearly and obviously, these are specialists that are being flown in that get a place to live above and beyond any Swedish people, right, that are supposed, you know, to be in some form of queue waiting, because this hyperscale network is so goddamn important. You know, like, it's a huge lie, and I don't believe. I mean, I can't believe that you have two governments filled with people who are supposed to work on this on a daily basis, that they're that stupid that they don't understand this. Because you can look at a fucking you can just go to any fucking server farm and you can find out that it's not 30,000. I mean, how many fucking server farms are we gonna have? You know, you can say, well, the warehouse, Amazon, they're automating their warehouses. These are, you know, but that's probably the only place where you could actually get a job if you don't have an education, you know, and we're talking about here companies that you will not be able to be in any sort of form of union. You will be paid the minimum stuff and they will be paid the minimum tax, right? But this is what our government, regardless of party, have been working with. And you may ask yourself, why? Why then? If it's not for the jobs, if it's not for anything else, why would they do this? And I have a couple of ideas, and I'm not going to completely discount the idea that it's some of them are just stupid. Because, I mean, I guess some of them may just be that easy to fool. And we all know, I mean, if you've ever worked with consultancy, you know how easy it is to fool people. I mean, these people get fucking blown away. I mean, it's the same thing. Like, these people who make these decisions, they're on Facebook and getting upset about fake news. I mean, our ministers are getting, you know, like, what was it? Our last minister of justice, she got so upset when she read a fake article about 43 people died on the first day of Illinois weed legalization, and she like unironically shared that, and being like, I knew it. I mean, this is how stupid some of them are. I mean, all you need to come in is with some fucking authority. You talk about a hyperscale. Guys, we're going to make the hyperscale network in your city. It has 30,000 jobs and we got blah, blah, blah. I get that, some of them. But I mean, some of these people just aren't. And that's where, corruption clearly comes in as one of these things that are happening. And it's corruption even on a personal level. What became clear is that and this again is now behind a paywall that I read before, and there's other things, but particularly people that work to close this deal are now employed by these companies as communicators, which essentially is lobbyists. And in Sweden, this lobbyist kind of transition between politicians. You are a politician. You work with some form of as a some form of within some form of government agency. It's pretty easy for you to take over when it privatizes, or to jump into the private sector and become a lobbyist, because you obviously know all of the people that work there, and you have an access to these politicians that no regular person have in Sweden. And this is completely okay. I mean, this is the weird thing. If you would read that article, and maybe I'll try to find it, these people are just like, well, that's how it is. The people who are inside the system, they are so ingrained that apparently the private and the political side should be like one. And it is like one, and that's how it works. And they don't even stop to think that in a democracy, these are separate entities, and your job is to counter this type of power structures. That's a democracy. It's not to reinforce them. We have democracy so that the people without power get to speak, so that they have something to say. You're supposed to represent the people, not these companies. They have enough power as it is. But this is completely forgotten in Sweden. So personal corruption, and that these people just, they work on this. Well, if I can close this deal, I can get, Facebook said I would become, I would get this much salary, and I can sit on a little board and I will be able to start to, work for the company that they're going to start in Sweden that is going to take care of these servers, and they're going to pay me X amount in salary. That's nice. I mean, these guys know this, right? Because this is how it goes. You end your political career in some way, and it doesn't even have to be political. It can be in some form of government agency. You jump over to the people that you've closed the deal with.
Yeah.
This is direct corruption on a personal level, right? And it's systematic. I mean, this is not the first time. Everyone in Sweden,
it's very typical.
Yeah.
It's not the first industry where it happens. There's even a name for the phenomenon. It's the revolving door.
Yeah.
And yeah, we have the same, at least the ones that's had the most scrutiny over the past few years has been the healthcare industry, since they effectively tried to open all of Finnish basic healthcare to the private sector. So, and coincidentally, there have been and still are a lot of people sort of jumping between some of these big private healthcare firms and different levels of government. And they seem to all be, for the most part, in the same party even. So that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. So
it's not definitely not restricted to Sweden or Finland or even the Nordics, and definitely not restricted to just the just big tech or the IT sector. But yeah,
No,
doesn't mean it's right.
no. Ever since we started private, but I think in Sweden it's pretty crazy because these people in this article, they don't even try. They don't even understand what's wrong with it. I mean, they don't even. They're. It's like they can't. They live in a world where that's completely okay. It's not even questionable. You know, like that's just the way you do it. I mean, the culture of this type of essentially fucking you up the ass is so deep that when they're like shocked that someone would ask them the question, that's preposterous. This is how it is, you know, which is just insane. Okay, I gotta be honest because I mean
Why
it
are you
says
getting so worked up over it?
yeah, every time because it just there are just so many people in Sweden who are just so fucked in the ass by this, you know. And it's incredible. It's incredible that the fundamental tenets of a democracy is forgotten. You know, while like, and it's happened so fast in Sweden. You know,
Exactly.
it's incredible how fast.
A few decades.
Yeah,
That's all it took.
it's only a few decades, and the big issue with this is that because I've been in building companies, and I know that you can ruin a culture. It can take you years to build a good culture, a good company where people are happy and you're doing something you care about with people you like. But it can take a day to destroy it. The problem is once it's destroyed, you often have no option but to fire everyone. You got to clean house. You got to remove all of it. You got to start over again. It's like you can't rebuild on a rotten ground. And what I'm sniffing here is rotten fucking ground. And that's what makes me pissed or kind of I'm like, shit, this is really bad. Because, it essentially it gives the only way out for people is for people to realize this and probably a real revolution. This power won't go away. And this type of culture is going to take generations to fix if you want to do it in a more traditional way. I mean, it's like you need a new company to come in there and get 51% of the vote and clean it up. That's the democratic way of doing it. Right?
Like social democratic in the traditional fashion, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, people seem to keep, and it's, if we're going into the question of whether Sweden is socialist or whether these Nordics nowadays are socialist, it's the thing is, none of these countries were ever like actually purely socialist. It was always some sort of social democracy, or even if you ask most leftists, I guess it's going to be, or even like libertarians of different stripes, it's going to be state capitalism. State capitalism is what like the Nordic welfare state was built on in all of these countries. Like that was it. And even state capitalism, exactly as you said, like with key industries being majority owned often by the state, like it actually worked out pretty well for us for a good while. And for some reason, we decided to let go of pretty much all of it at some point in the late 20th century. And that's pretty much that's a pretty big part of the, or central part of the explanation as to how we got here, how we got to the point we are
Yeah.
in now.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. And I mean, there are so many parts of it that I feel, but I feel like a lot of it, and we've been talking about it before, I think even on the show, is that also that mental shift, right? You're having that mental shift, and it makes it hard to, it's like, for instance, I get worked up about this because this to me is really, really, really bad. Like if I saw this type of shit going on in a company, I would have fired everyone. Like, if I even sniffed this, I would be like, this is bad. Okay? But this is like a whole government that is drenched in this shit. You know? And there's no one, there's no media talking about it. They're making this, but they're not really talking about how corrupt shit is. I mean, you can see it right here. This is a smoking gun, This is it. And this is just a few of all of these stories that have happened during the corona, just for the half year that we've been kind of running this and reporting. And
Yeah. This
and
is also a fairly,
yeah,
I'm not sure if uniquely is the right word, but it's fairly typical of the Nordics, this idea that there is no corruption here.
yeah,
Since, we're doing so well on all the global rankings and stuff, like, since there's uh, none of that, like, going to civil servants or, state officials with a bunch of money in your hand and getting them do things the way you like them to do, or get like preferential treatment,
mm,
just because it doesn't look like that here, or hasn't looked like that here, uh, like verbatim. That's been enough for us to do well in these comparisons. And obviously the establishment has like latched on to that narrative that there is no, like, look at how great we are, there is no corruption here. And sure, there are some forms of corruption that are pretty uncommon here, but there's a whole set of practices. Some people talk of like systemic or like structural corruption, and in Finland we even have a sort of a saying or a phrase for it, which is maan tapa, which
maan
stands for,
tappa.
yeah, which stands for like the way of the country, like the way things just have always been done here, sort of.
Oh shit.
Just like this is just a common practice. It's like, even it's the phrase itself, even that like normalizes this kind of thing. This is just the way we do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
It's fine. It's
and I mean,
fine.
like we
Don't
talked before, I
nothing to
think,
see here.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh, well, we've always done it like this. But I mean, the reality is we haven't always done it like this in Sweden. And that's what I find quite interesting. Because, like, you go back to the 80s, this is when it really started to change, and the idea of new public management. And I think it's very important to kind of go back to that point, because there is something about it that we should know. And I had a slide on it, at least I named it. We talked about before, the idea of the submerged state, and why it's so problematic to have private companies profit out of government in this type of way. That we have Arbetsförmedlingen in Sweden, we have the schools, we have the hospitals, we have all of these things. Is that the public, the private companies, they can afford lobbyists. They can afford all of these things. I mean, a large part of their profit, if you are, let's say like this, you are a company and your goal is to make profit. Let's take the liberal idea. So you're going to do anything you can to make profit, okay? And now you're having these students that are going to come to you, and you're going to get money for each student from the government. All right. Now, so how do I increase my profit? Well, I can get more students in the same classroom. I can spend money on getting to know and get in with all of these politicians, because they can change the rules and allow me to get more money. Or they could remove rules so that I don't have to publish all of this data that makes me look bad and makes me get less students. Or they can do X, Y, the whole idea of a private company is to increase its profit. If we're going to accept that, I don't accept that, because I don't think that, our mind is so skewed that we actually believe that. That doesn't have to be true, but our mind makes it true. And that's how most companies operate today, because that's how we formulate our private entity. It doesn't have to be like that, but it is that
It's
like
written
that.
into the law, but
Yeah, it even
the
is
thing is
today.
that I mean, it's written into the law, and that's why, and it's been there for a good while, and that's why it's the norm, and that's why everyone operates on that principle,
Yeah, but it
and
obviously
that's why
doesn't
we
have to be
can't
like that.
even, and that's why we arguably can't even expect anything different.
Yeah,
Like this is the minimum. This is the principle that they operate on.
yeah,
Like the main thing they are maximizing for and optimizing for. But the thing is, it's a law.
yeah,
Who writes the laws? It's people. Like this isn't like this isn't supposed to be like galaxy brain shit, but apparently it is.
yeah. No, and I mean that's the weird thing, to me. Like this sort of their sort, and a lot of people, specifically on the right, I mean, obviously their sort of worldview on this has completely taken over. People are just accepting this, and when you go and say, well, the private industry is more effective, everyone nods. Yeah, that's a fact, and you're like, what? Effective as to what? Are they, is it profitable to them really to give better education or have less students in their classes? I mean, what are they supposed to be effective? The easiest way to increase profit here is obviously to make sure that you keep or at least one of the really important thing is to make sure that you keep really well with the politicians. And if you would, you're one of these private entities that live off the state today. One of your biggest fears is to get some form of political party that opposes this, that says, hey, we're going to cut you off. And they will spend any amount of resources to make sure that that doesn't happen. So once you kind of have that system where a lot of people are profiting and are making a lot of money on these sort of things, you are up against a wall of impossibility. Right? And what will they then do to kind of work this? Well, obviously they will lobby politicians, they will close to them, they will allow the politicians to sit in the boards of these companies. To many extents, obviously politicians and different board of government workers have started these companies, right? They are part of these companies. They are, again, the revolving door, right? So now you're having this sort of mix between the private entity and the state where every one of them is profiting and you are losing. How are you going to go up against that? And this is kind of what I want to go into. How will they strategy, guys? You may say that these people, I will look at the Swedish Democrats, everyone is upset about them. No. The Swedish Democrats is a function of people getting it worse in the country. And they want to find something easy to blame. And it's perfect for the established parties. This is why this is allowed to continue to the extent that it has, And I'm going to say allowed because you can stop anything if you want to. You can make sure that people get a better life if you want to. You can afford anything you really want if you want to. It's not really about that. But this is perfect because it becomes, now all of the normal people are fighting each other, Oh, BLM, that's horrible, yada, 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 oh my God. Or, Abdul, he got a house, but Agda, she doesn't even have enough pension to sleep. Man, that's where our money is going. That's where our money is going. That's where our money is going. And you go like, no, fucking 140 fucking million just got paid to this, Loads and loads and loads of money are being wasted on private entities that are making huge profits each year. Whenever we print money and you lose money, you know where it goes? It goes out to fucking gold market. Where, people investing it. The money here is leaking out, but it isn't leaking out in the way that you think. And that's, to me, it blows my mind that there is, I haven't heard anyone really talk about this in Sweden. I mean, obviously not the political parties. They have nothing to gain. And that's the kind of thing. This is what I'm saying. All of the political parties are the same. They're equally corrupt in this, Specifically that story about Facebook. If that doesn't make it, obviously, I don't know what will. But they won't talk about this. They have no intention of changing this. It has become such a function of the Swedish government that this is how it is. And it's all about the profit, that like we talked about, that those natural tendencies toward fascism are going to show because people are not happy. They're getting it worse. They're realizing, maybe not, it's not that obvious that they're getting it worse, but they're kind of feeling it. How come I can't buy a house? How come the cars are getting so much more expensive? The good cars, at least. How can this be? How does it feel like, when it comes to buying a lot of stuff, I thought a million was a lot. A million crowns was a lot of money. And if I want to buy like a boat, a new boat these days, it's like more expensive than a house. Like the luxurious, you. I think a lot of people realize that. Oh my God, I'm getting it worse. And why is my school why can't I get my drugs on time? Why have all of these services falling apart? Why don't I get a job? Even though
yeah,
I've been, when I try to get an education from the government agencies that are supposed to do this, how come I don't get an education? People
yeah,
are
it's not.
realizing it and they're pissed. And the thing is,
Yeah,
what do
it's
you do
not
then?
necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about like objectively having it better or worse. It can just be, and often is just about this sense of uh like insecurity, like, or a loss of security that you used to have. Like, things don't have to be like perceivably or objectively worse for you yet. But I mean, even if it hasn't hit you yet, you've seen it happen to people around you, and the more you see of it, the less safe you feel.
Mm.
And the only people who are still like, who find no issue, take no issue with the way things are now, tend to be the ones who haven't like quite realized yet that they're not safe from this. They're not safe from these trends and developments that we're seeing.
No, and I feel like that's a lot of people. A lot of people don't get that they're essentially screwed, and uh, and exactly how screwed they are, and how bad it's gonna get for them. We're facing an enormous amount of crises in a short term. It's gonna happen soon. I mean, I'm not sure if you noted how much in the 2000s and 2010s as well, that a lot of the really rich people bought bunkers. It's a huge business, actually. What you want to do, if you're interested, is study what the rich people buy. I mean,
It's still going on.
yeah,
Like,
it's going on. I mean, it's increasing, but
yeah,
it started already back then, and you kind of want to get a feeling for how things can change by what they are doing and what they're buying and what's happening, and the it also kind of plays into that, which makes me so, this is one of the things, if you're out there, just saying that immigrants is the problem, you are a nyttig idiot, as we say in Sweden, a useful idiot. Like, if you don't think that this is a part of it all, if that is a part of all, that's a natural progression, that's not, this is the way that you kind of reinforce this, then you're wrong. And if you don't get that all the Swedish political parties are behind this today, because if they weren't, they would really point this out and fight against this, because it's really important to do. This sort of huge wealth inequality in the country, then, you know, it's just, and it makes me really sad, because I mean, as to a certain extent, in some countries you see them kind of awake. At least in US, you have a lot of people kind of waking up to this idea that what the fuck, you know, there is no, this is really shit, and there, but in Sweden, it feels like, that people are just, they're taking the red pill and that's it. That's where they stop, You gotta fucking move on. That's the first step. You gotta start looking at this system and understanding kind of how it works.
yeah,
And
exactly.
and
Just
mm,
realizing that things are fucked up and that the current political establishment is not going to save us, like, no matter who you manage to vote in, at least not on time,
yeah,
uh, and arguably not ever, just due to how the system happens, just how the system works, how representative democracy
yeah,
works.
and
When you like, for some people, they just realize it and sort of lie down or start like, and or even realize it and just still keep playing the same games, the blame game, or infighting or whatever. Some people just get stuck there. Like the political analysis starts and stops at like, man, the establishment sucks, and if we're ever to make it out of this, or even like see that glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, like a glimmer of light at some point, or something better, or something just less shitty, we need to like work on it. We can't stop at just condemning whatever we have right now.
No, and it makes it incredibly hard because you get this polarization, right? And people say, "Oh, it's internet polarization." No, it's a created polarization. This is an encouraged polarization between identity politics of different types of sides. And I'm using that term the way that the right wing would use it. Okay, we all know that there's a lot of good within that type of but the sort of liberal kind of takeover of that sort of word and of that sort of phrases and of these nonsense political issues. I mean, it's intended to keep this status quo, and it's a status quo that I don't see how it can lead to anything else than fascism. I think it's like the natural progression of these sort of neoliberal corporatist idea becomes the fascist state. Because you need to control the poor. And how do you control them? By giving them something to hate. And something to be angry about. And something to be upset about. It's a very natural way to... And the issue is obviously that, the upper middle class and the 1%, they wash their hands. I mean, I don't think everyone... I think it's really rare even on the top that people actually understand what's happening, And the moment that you talk about it, most people obviously, they don't really... This is what we're doing right now, is we're going like kind of all the way with all of this stuff. And we're kind of taking it on a deep and kind of hard level. And I understand that a lot of people, specifically if you're in the system, you don't want to hear this stuff. It's tough. I mean, you don't really want to hear about the imperialism of West. You don't really want to talk about, the real problem with immigration. You don't really want to feel bad about the way that you're living your life. I mean, I understand that, but the problem is, it's not you have done nothing wrong,
Yeah.
and this is another part of this way that is framed, that I feel that a lot of people, the moment that you start talking about the system, they feel like you're accusing them of something. We need to get that mentality out of here. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're on one of the 1% of the 1% on the winning side, but you kind of want to change this. If you're fucked but in the upper class, if you're fucked in the middle class, or wherever you are, whatever color of your skin or your sexual orientation, it's time to forget about that, But it's not... You got to watch this and see this as a system, and you don't have to feel bad about living your life, but you should probably think about, how can we, change this democratically, or how can we change this in any other way? Because for most of us, and I'm talking about all of us, at least everyone who will watch this show now until the future, don't fool yourself that you're not one of those people. Your life is going to get shitloads of worse. Right? And even if your life stays the same or get marginally better, life for a lot of people that are going to get loads of worse. And these sort of tensions within the society, they're growing now, and they will continue to grow. At a certain level, you cannot keep a society if these differences are too hard. When people don't really have a place to live or food enough to eat, it's not going to be nice. And you better hope that either you have a fascist, strong military-style government that can kill these people, or that we have come to another solution. Perhaps a solution that actually includes all the amazing technology we have, that actually works to save and work with this planet. A fresh, if you're going to have, a fair and good open market, if that's what you're for, or all of these things. It's not enough
And
to,
just as a necessary and usual reminder, you probably don't want to, like, I mean, even the people who can imagine themselves being on sort of like the good side, or like the categorized as an acceptable kind of person in a potential fascist system or state emerging in, say, the Nordics, uh, try to keep in mind that, like, fascist, you can look at history, like fascist systems and states, ideologies, they will never stop looking for enemies. They're always going to find new enemies. When the m- current main one is neutralized, they're going to find new ones. It's going to just expand and expand and expand. It's a fundamentally paranoid system. It's and it's based on finding enemies and scapegoats. And I mean, if you're feeling extremely lucky and well positioned, then maybe you can imagine you can somehow imagine for a scenario where that goes well for you personally. But I think just about anyone living today uh, also knows enough people of different backgrounds uh, and in different situations that, like, you're going to see a lot of people get fucked over, even if you somehow manage to avoid it yourself. So, like, if you somehow are, if you happen to be entertaining the notion that maybe like this sort of completing the cycle, which we seem to be sort of on now, or like completing the route, like going through fascism before maybe transitioning to something better. If you think that's something you could weather, I really implore you to think again. Just read some history, please, for the sake of all of us. It's not going to be fun for anyone. So
No, and I don't think
yeah,
I think it's very very few people that actually, and that's kind of thing. I think a lot of people, what a lot of people don't get is the connection. Like, is the historic connection to what actually leads to this. What are the big problems with huge inequality? What are the problems when people don't have jobs? How do you deal with the future? And the fun thing is, obviously there's no answers to that today. I mean, and I think the Pirate Party actually has quite a few. I mean, we're talking about the positive side. What we need basic income. We need to remove a lot of these government private interfaces that are largely useless. You know, uh, and making sure that we build affordable fucking housing. You know, releasing and constraining making sure that not only that we take care of this crazy inflation. We can't have the private banks print money like they do today. It's insane. It's very, very, very dangerous. We need to change this fundamentally neoliberal worldview, and and to be honest, I think trying to change people's minds on that is the only thing that we can do at the moment, and say, hey, look, we have seen all of the warning signs we need. We need to wake up, and we need to, if you don't want to vote for the Pirate Party, or maybe they are not representing this view, go on, actually doing something about it. I think that's the important, that's kind of the only thing we can do. I mean, and if nothing else, if you can prepare, you know like, prepare to leave, prepare to do something else, prepare to make sure that you can always leave. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to be the first one to be targeted if it goes that far. um, but but uh, like, I mean, I know because I've been growing up in that type of environment. I know that a lot of these people, they won't, you know. And it's not really that they like it. They don't approve of it, but they, you know, it's convenience, right? If you're already living a somehow convenient life, it's so easy to not say anything. I mean, Germany is the perfect example of it. And you know, the only thing that stopped Germany were other countries, the fact that they attacked other countries. But I mean, imagine if you get this fascist uprising everywhere. I mean, eventually the countries are going to start to take each other out because you need to keep enemies. Uh, you know, like dystopian future scenario, right? Um, but it could go on for a long time. I mean, for a very long. It's very hard to once these systems are in place, they're very hard to remove. And it's the same thing, I'm afraid, and that's what I'm starting to realize. It's the same thing with this. The media ain't talking about this. No one is really discussing this. No one is really showing the wealth disparity in our country. No one is explaining why that is fundamentally problematic. No one is talking about the type of corruption that we're now seeing. I mean, there are articles being published about it, but no one is really, you know, that's really bad. I mean, no one really talked about the Panama Papers. No one is really discussing, you know, how do we actually solve these issues? Because this is the climate crisis. This is everything. We're living on a system that is fundamentally rotten and that we have to
Yeah,
see for what it is.
it's literally not sustainable. Like, we can't go on for much longer like this. And I think most people who pay attention to what's going on in the world or even their country can see the cracks forming already.
Mm.
And they are actually getting quite deep already. So it's just, I think it's hard to ignore. I don't know.
Yeah, I hope so. But the problematic thing, you know, in Sweden is that we don't have any. I mean, for instance, and I'm not sure how it is in the other countries, you know, wherever you're from. But I'm saying we have no political movement that really stands up to this and really talks about this. I mean, the Pirate Party, I think, we will wait and see their local, you know, party politics. But most people in Sweden, we can't believe this about our own country. We can't, you know. It's like we're so good. I mean, we're the moral peak of the whole world. I mean, we wouldn't. No. I mean, even if they're, you know, it's we're fed such lies, you know, from such early childhood. You know, like Sweden has that American exceptionalism, but the Swedish version of it, and it's
Yeah,
very dangerous. You know, it makes
maybe
it very hard. Like if you start talking with them about, you know, Swedish imperialism and issues with it, that, you know, take whatever, you know, example, they lock like a little muscle. You know, like they will stop listening because they don't want to. I mean, that's really, I don't.
it's uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable. And Swedish people do almost anything not to be uncomfortable. And again, Swedish people have a large sense of guilt. So they'll take it up on themselves, like we talked about before. It's so important to see this as a function of a system. It's not that you are a bad person. None of us are bad people. Not even a lot of people that own. I mean, not even these politicians are, you know,
Like,
necessarily bad.
let's say
They
just
just believe in a system.
no one is fundamentally or like essentially a bad person, but like, or like, I guess, yeah, essentialism is maybe the key here. Like, nobody, like, in and of themselves is evil or bad,
No,
but
and
still, we.
uh, yeah. I mean, I feel that belief that you know, this is one thing that can
This
drive me
is,
nuts
I
about
think this,
left wing
yeah,
people.
this
You know,
probably
sometimes.
goes back to the whole. I mean, this whole notion that of like, this really strong like individualism. It's a very neoliberal thing as well. Like, it's all up to the individuals to do better and
Yeah,
like look into the mirror and fix themselves.
yeah.
And it's like the same mentality, like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, like just work harder and you'll make it. And
Mm.
it's the same thing with when you tell people to that, like, the fix to say racism is that they uh like whip themselves or like flagellate themselves and uh like live in this perpetual guilt and like just wallow over all the words they have used. Like this is the same thing, like this overt and like unnecessarily thorough focus on the individual,
Yeah, and I mean
like what the
it comes.
individual does.
Yeah,
Since
exactly.
most of these issues are like I find if we're talking about like solving them in the long term, the only productive way to discuss them is like on a systemic level, on a structural level. Like all the individualist stuff, like the sort of checking yourself and sort of like it can be useful to, you know, in just everyday life. I mean, it's usually a good idea to try to be like uh try to become like nicer all around to be around. Like a nicer person to be around. Like that's you're probably not going to go too wrong with that. But it's not going to solve these like the solution to all of this shit we're looking at is not going to be found there in like training individual people to do better or think in a different way. Uh, it's going to be about the systems, like changing the structures that we inhabit in a way that it's uh like it's harder to act in these like hashtag problematic ways to begin with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like, I mean, it is a fundamental problem of that mindset, which is why I think, I mean, and this is kind of what I'm saying. A lot of people they don't understand why it would even be wrong, right? And also they will take it upon themselves. Like, I mean, yes, God damn it, great if you sort your trash, if you think about it, if you bike. I mean, all of those things, all of them are important. It's so important that we take our own responsibility to the extent we can. But no, you're not fundamentally going to save the world. I mean, if we want to change something, we need to look at all of the things that are perpetuating a system. And we need to be prepared to look at the system. We need to take a step back, watch everything, and then come with some form of idea how we can change ourselves. It's really good to start with yourself. I would say that's almost always essential. You need to start with yourself. But you need to not stop with yourself. You can't stop there. And
this is also where the way we're conditioned to look at sort of frame societal like huge system-wide problems on an individual level, on a personal level. This comes in here as well.
Yeah.
Since once you I mean once you realize that these some people like have a really hard time moving on to the realization that the systems, like the many of the solutions can't be accomplished with alone or even with just a small dedicated group of people. I mean, when you get to the small dedicated group of people, you can actually get quite a lot done. But there are issues that can be, I mean, where the root causes of a problem can only be solved collectively. And because we've been conditioned to this extremely individualistic mindset, that's just a tough thing to swallow and sort of like process and accept for many people. We're literally conditioned to not think of things or like problems as something you can tackle collectively or something you should tackle collectively. It's
Yeah.
always just about you
Yeah.
yourself, like what can you do in your everyday life on your own, in your own little one room apartment? Like what the hell?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is that sort of thing. I mean, it's that type of individualism is because and it's when we're talking, I think was it yesterday when we're talking with the EU pirate, we're talking about this because they, I mean, obviously moved from a communist systems, Czech pirate, um, out to this kind
Oh,
of
did you have
super liberal.
did you have Czech pirates over yesterday?
Yeah. Or yeah, well,
Oh,
not
cool.
over, but yeah, on the show.
Yeah, who did you
And
have?
John Lixa is not one of
Okay.
the. He is responsible for some transportation questions. It's a very interesting discussion because you
Oh,
this sort of the idea of this neoliberalism is that also comes from that ultimate form of individualism, and
yeah.
you hear this simplified in so many different ways. The thing is that when you go, there isn't ultimate collectivism is very bad, but extreme individualism is also bad. We need to understand that we are both. It's not one or the other.
We
But
don't exist in a vacuum. We can't be reduced to these
no.
atomistic
And
models. Like it's just how not how we work. Like as a species, as
no.
like beings.
And the
When it,
irony, kind of the irony is that if you have that liberal market economy, you're going to build more and more complex collective structures on top of it. I mean, take away everything from your life that someone else have been involved in doing. I mean, try just to think, make that a thought experiment for a little while. You'll be sitting alone, naked, on a rock. That's it. That's your life
yeah,
now. I mean, the level of our cooperation is incredible, and the
yeah,
collectivism in what we're doing
and
together,
like
regardless if it's a free
yeah,
market or if it's within, regardless of the organization that we organize in, it doesn't matter, It's amazing. And the thing is that we actually decide the forms under which we organize. This is something that is under our collective decision, our democracy. This is under our responsibility to decide how should we be able to organize, and in what capacity should that type of organization be able to handle that type of problem, and maybe we should have another type of organization that handles this type of problem. These are things that are all within our political, and our society. It's up to our to decide. And this is what kind of one of those things that is so hard to break, because people think that, I was listening, like, people literally think that, I was listening to Alexander Bard and his talk about, they talk about woke capitalism and all of that stuff.
guy again.
And no, and it's like, he's like, well, it was the companies that made people climb down from the trees. That was entrepreneurship and all of this shit, and it's
Oh
like,
God.
it's like, goddamn, they're trying to make it into some form of, that companies are some form of natural law, not like a legal institution that we have decided should be run in a certain way. I mean, you can start a lot of different types of organization. You can start collectives. You can start from syndicate organization. You can do, you can create a flat type of organization. You can have a government. You can have a hierarchical. You can have this sort of, obviously the stock traded organization. You can create a public, there are loads and loads and loads of forms of organization that we can use and utilize. Companies, the public traded companies is one of them, and it happens to be a pretty bad one.
Yeah,
In
it
many
happens to
ways.
be one of the most hierarchical and least democratic
Yeah.
ways of organizing human activity that like exist currently.
Yeah. It's an extremely, if I were to say, let's make the most authoritarian, shitty way of organizing a group of people and to do something, I would say go make a company, go make a limited company,
Yeah,
and get it traded on the stock market. It's an absolutely shit way of organizing, and
yeah,
these are things that we actually decide. And I think,
yeah. It's actually more fundamental than people think. Like, does this sort of link to the whole discussion about like the private sector always being somehow more efficient and somehow objectively better and somehow, you know, in and of itself, sort of perpetuating this, you know, freedom of choice and like freedom in general. And when you actually look at the average company, especially like once you move on from the from like actually small companies, uh, take a medium-sized or a large a company or a large corporation, like how much there's like it's an the antithesis in many ways to any kind of freedom of choice or like agency of the individual. Like they basically they tell you, they determine for you for like 1/3 of uh every day at the minimum, 8 hours every day. Like you have no agency over what you're supposed to be doing, over what you're doing. Like you can only listen to what you're told to do, and that's what you have to do. And this often, for many forms of work, it actually extends beyond the workplace, especially nowadays with everyone working from home and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's just fundamentally extremely hierarchical, and the agency and the possibilities to effect, you know, or change the way that things are organized, or the way that, yeah, anything basically in the workplace is organized, are absolutely minimal for the like an individual worker.
Yeah.
So it's weird that sort of this, yeah,
I mean, and it gets
pri- the
conflated, right?
private business is sort of like
Mm.
conflated, yeah, with this
Uh,
general
It's like
uh,
entrepreneur. I mean,
liberal slash neoliberal idea of freedom.
yeah. I mean, it's like whenever someone does something, that's, that's a company. That's this entrepreneurship. It's like you can be an entrepreneur. You don't have to have a company, man. Like I mean, a lot of these things just drives me nuts. The conflation of these sort of things, that everything, it's so incredibly oversimplified, and it's accepted as a general truth. You know, it that's what really blows my mind. It's like when you try to tell, like, I mean, you just go like, but what is a company? The answers you get is this is a pretty simple fucking question if you're gonna argue for the benefit of it, but it's like, you know, and typically it's people who have jumped over, like it's still at that level, and it's, yeah, it's worrisome because we really have to work with a kind of a broader idea of what we can do together under what forms, and and talking about not privatization, but maybe talking about what that's not necessarily a problem, but let's talk about the profit. Let's talk
Yeah,
about how we can create
we
organizations that actually effectivizes the service. If you're trying to, you have a lot of things in this in the society which is a service. Okay, like if you have a hospital, your main goal is to give care to the people who are there. You're a service. Your main goal isn't to make profit. That's a very bad incentive to have. That doesn't mean that you cannot not necessarily have private actors within the field, but you have to make sure that profit isn't their main incentive. Care and service have to be their main incentive, and certainly, I'm not sure about you, but often when I discuss this, and this is kind of why, I mean, for you, you'll understand we're going kind of deep and weird into these topics, but it's also kind of, maybe if we're gonna, start anew, I want to have one show where we actually go all the way, in a way, like we'll really talk about it, because quite often I feel,
Sure.
like with so many people and in so many discussions you have about this, you really have to dumb it down, and it's generally about the
You have to
limitation.
work through all of this, work through a lot of things before you get to the thing you actually want to discuss. Sort of,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's essentially also one of the problems. And I don't think, when you're arguing with someone and you're like, and they're like, a company is always better. A little bit to what we're talking about sometime, the argument against that isn't really well define what you mean, because obviously that, the audience is like, well, I don't know. it's so simple to say things like, lower taxes. And you go like, yeah, I mean, I can agree with that. It really depends on what taxes you're talking about. Like, it's so many of these general things. And I feel like quite often what you end up having to do is just try to use the logic within the framework that their mind is currently in, to use that to a level where it becomes absurd, where they must admit that, okay, it gets absurd. If all right, I'm not complaining about the Marxists, that they tore down all the Lenin statues. But yeah, I think it's really wrong that they tear down these stuff. Okay, I can't have this, this sort of general argument. Often today, the right wing obviously take this general form of argument. You know what I mean? Generalist form of argument, that free speech, yada yada yada. And then you go, look. Why aren't you out fighting for the BLM protesters then, if it's so important to you? And they go, but the BLM, that should be outlawed. That's illegal. That's a horror. And you go like, well, now are you really for free speech?
Yeah, or like free expression. Or
yeah, I mean, is that really important for you? Yeah, right to protest. Are we really for that? If this is, because no, you ain't, and you kind of have to reduce the argument in their own way of framing things, But it's at times it's so incredibly tiresome, because it's just.
I mean, what happened to this whole thing about defending to the death your right to say it, even if that you there is like disagrees with you or something? Like that's the quote, like the one that's misattributed to Voltaire, that they go for every time. So what happened to that? Like, even if you can't see, like if you can't see the sort of approach or the main claim or point they are making, they are still like, this is the way they are making their statement.
Yeah.
This is the way they are expressing their dissent. So are you now saying that only certain, like, that's basically them showing their colors?
Yeah.
Like, there are some ways to express dissent, or some opinions, some ideas that they actually can't stomach for some reason, and they think that should be shut down.
Yeah, and that's where you really want to push. That's where you really kind of want to push that, because it's also like, oh, internet should be free, and you go like, well, the reality is because on a lot of these places, that's exactly where they're half-assed, and I feel like a lot of people fall into the trap, and I think, like, there is a pink pill beyond the black pill, kind of. You got a red pill, black pill, you eat a lot of pills, and then you get the pink pill. But I mean, the question is also how you kind of lead, and how you get people through that journey and out to some place where it's also not so filled with hate. Because
or at least a productive place. Like, I'm sure a lot of people, like, it's a very human thing to feel hate or frustration or spite or whatever, and use that to, I guess, fuel.
Because I mean, everyone
fuel your action. That can be fine, but like, I mean, for the sake of all of us, if that hate is like directed towards a specific group of people, it's probably not going to help us in the long run, like, collectively.
No.
So,
I mean, we need to direct our anger at, the system, if anything. Watching this, being able to see how it works.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's one of the kind of things that also that liberal mind, why I find that maybe to be one of the worst, is because, when someone has started hating something like that, I mean, at least they are, they're passionate. They're hating for a reason. They have at least, they have chosen to kind of open their eyes or whatever and be upset about something because they feel something. And to some form of core, it typically comes down to that they care about something, typically their country, or they care about the future.
They have some kind of a conviction.
Yeah, and I mean, I
And they have
like
seen
that.
something that they find wrong in the
Yeah,
world, and they'd like to fix it.
yeah, and I
And
mean, I think
yeah,
that's like the fundamentally a great thing to see. And it is easier and doable to turn that hate around, but it's extremely hard to work with people that completely close off their shell and don't want to hear anything. And I think that's often the way I think, how to approach people to not to make them feel bad, you know?
or sort of find the common ground there.
Because I think that's
Some
one of the problems with a lot of crises. Like if we're talking about, again, like because that neoliberal mindset blames itself, like we talked about. So in order for people to actually really start caring about the climate crisis, we need to get out of a lot of these frameworks of mind. And one of them is to feel guilt about what you are doing or not doing, and understanding that this is a part of a bigger problem, and also perhaps opening up to being a part of something that is essentially collectivistic, because it's something we have to solve at a greater level, right? We talked about, right? And I think maybe, if you have some answers or thoughts on that, but I think it's a great question for anyone to think about. How do we approach? Approaching hate is one thing, but how do we approach people in a way where we don't meet them with guilt, but we help them to perhaps just open a little bit and seeing that there is an issue with how our current system works, but also that we can change it. And we didn't talk about a lot of these positive changes today that can help, but we have been before a lot of times. So because there is a lot of hope for the future, and I think vision is a part of the answer to these things. But essentially, how do we communicate in a way that just doesn't perpetuate that people run all over to the hate? You have to wake them up. It's like, oh, I'm gonna vote for the fascists.
Yeah, it's probably obvious, but like we've already moved on from the sort of basic stuff we wanted to cover, like the slides that Kringland had up. So if there's anyone following in the chat or otherwise, it's all open now. Like,
Yeah, it's been for a while, and actually we've been going for 2 hours. So I was thinking to kind of start. But if you have some thoughts, don't hesitate. I think I would think a little bit about ideas how I can approach people, in real life, but even online. Now I know that this one was a little bit, maybe I shouldn't be so angry at the system. People may take it personal, but how do we deal with people? How do we help change this in a way and that we can get people to
do we?
want to open their eyes a bit instead of
Yeah,
being it like I'm not. You don't want to force anyone to take in information that they don't want to hear. That's not possible. But how do we help them to feel good about it and feel safe about it and feel, how do we help them to grow their empathy as they're doing this? Not like, I hate those people,
arguably,
I hate those people, I hate those people, I hate those people. How do we get them to be like, I feel
arguably,
empathy with all of us,
a lot of things going on in the world right now aren't really things that one can, in most cases, feel any kind of safe or happy about. But I'd maybe aim for like acceptance
Mm,
and sort of maybe some kind of empowerment as well, like getting the idea that you can't go out there alone and change all of it. Like you can't make a huge difference with just your own choices, and you can't even like, even if you manage to mobilize large like larger masses of people for change, it won't be instant, and it's basically a marathon. But just like get people to internalize the idea that these things can be accomplished,
mm.
and like there are alternatives. This is maybe the thing, like get people to recognize that there are issues. This is probably the easiest part, but then sort of move on to sort of get a more broad and thorough understanding of the issues and how, I guess, all encompassing and like yeah, how they're everywhere, and then also still not somehow not feel like disencouraged by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can have an episode next time, or well, not sure next, but sometime where we actually talk about alternatives and ways to kind of more practical answers to what we can do to change things around. But I mean, it's a good question to leave off on, and I think, if it's not clear, I mean, Sweden is obviously not socialist. Now, we don't want to go in and define that term, but I mean it in any possible way that you could interpret the term. Choose whatever lie or invention or, whatever you want, or, choose the original Marxist
or choose
idea
the
or
actual dictionary or Wikipedia definition of it.
Or any right-wing
still
pundits.
going to be no.
Yeah, exactly.
Or choose any of the fascists or right-wing populists or weirdly fascist adjacent classical liberals. Choose any of their definitions of socialist or socialism, or
even
like the
social
way they use the word.
democracy, social democrat, and you will find it.
And the answer to the question, is Sweden socialist, is still going to be no.
Yeah, it's no. No, not at all, not even close, no matter how you define it. If you, by some weird chance, defined it as neoliberal corporatism, then maybe, yes. But that, you would be the first one who ever to ever define it that way. Anyway, great to have you here, Maja.
Thanks for having me again.
Yes, and hopefully we will continue. I'm not sure if we're gonna. I mean, I don't mind doing every Thursday. It's nice, and we'll try to pick some topic, and we'll see. If you like this, I mean, obviously let us know. Go into the Discord. I mean, if you want to like this, the idea was kind of to actually delve a little bit deeper into these type of topics. Have a show where we talk, where we follow the ideas kind of through. Like, let's take this income inequality that we're seeing in Sweden and see what happens, what follows, what do we think, and go all the way out on the fringe ideas. Let's go all the way out to anarchy, anarcho-syndicalism or whatever, and let's go all the way to solar punk or, these things. Yeah. I think we lost you again. But yeah, that's basically the idea, and taking different topics and cover them, and hopefully, we will be a little bit more clear next time that we obviously want to invite everyone to discuss it on our Discord. We don't have to sit there just our two, but we'll take a topic, start with it, and then stick to a topic kind of for a longer period of time, and just really, let's put our tin foil hats on, and let's examine this from a progressive side, all the way.
Yeah, let's sit down in that armchair and start, philosophizing and theorizing. Like, this is, I guess, supposed to be the place for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got cut off for like half a minute there. I'm not sure what happened. But yeah, basically, it would be nice to. I personally figured it would be nice to actually talk about the ideology, like talk about ideology for a change, instead of just denouncing other people as just the way that the whole concept of ideology, the word is being thrown around. It's usually to condemn others for believing different things than you do, or like this weird sort of like argument to shut down others, as like, well, you're just I guess this you're following this and this ideology, so none of what you're saying is worth anything or worth consideration.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a almost demonized thing to, I guess, explicitly discuss ideology, or even, or admit to finding certain certain ideologies appealing, or so it would be nice to just, I guess, delve into that, because again, this denunciation of ideology altogether is a very neoliberal thing as well. It's meant to sort of tune out, sort of like veil the inherently political nature of the decisions that are made every day regarding all of our lives.
Yeah. And I mean, I think most of us live in a world where, essentially you could say that this neoliberal hegemony makes everything but being liberal to a certain extent an extreme form of position. And they're pretty good at that. And that's something that, no matter where you come from, I think you've experienced, but great. Super. Come back with us, obviously, with feedback if you want to join our Discord. We're always, or I'm always there somewhere. I mean, there's a lot of channels where you can post. And tomorrow we'll have Corona update at 7 as usual. Also, I understand that we are kind of changing our schedule a little bit. I know the times aren't updated everywhere, but it's also because we are still kind of exploring, how we're going to do, what do we have time for, and stuff like that. And maybe, we'll figure it out during this coming 2 or 3 weeks, in a way. So nothing is set in stone. So you can also give feedback on if the times don't really, I feel like, and we're always going to look at, the overall numbers and figure out, when is the best time to send. So there's a lot of things kind of going on that way, just so you know. But thank you so much for watching today, and we will see each other tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Everyone.
Kuken ute. Nej, stoppa in den igen, Miss Midget, är du snäll.